On October 31st of 1517, almost exactly 500 years ago, a conflict that took 13 millions of human lives took place in Europe. It lasted more than a century. Because of the great impact it had on humanity and the lessons we can learn from, it is essential to understand the events that took place from all the points of view possible.
The proper understanding of what happened with the Church during the 1500s has been difficult for two reasons. First, Catholic historians tell that the Church was already under Reformation prior to 1517, while on the other hand, Protestant historians refer to the Catholic Church as corrupt and in need of immediate reform.
In fact, during the early 15th, the Church in Rome under the reign of Julius II decided to build the greatest church in the world. He held a competition and invited lots of artists and architects to draw designs. Its construction started in 1506, lasted through the reigns of 21 popes and 8 architects, and was finished 120 years later. According to one estimate, the cost of building a church like St. Peter's Basilica would be around $600 million. Obviously, the artwork is invaluable.
In 1517, Pope Leo V commissioned the German Dominican preacher Johann Tetzel to sell indulgences. In that time, it was believed that all the money that Tetzel was trying to raise was for the ongoing reconstruction of St. Peter's Basilica. The accusation that he sold full forgiveness for sins not yet committed caused great scandal.
Martin Luther, a German monk, considered his actions evil and began to preach openly against him. The actions of Tetzel inspired Luther to write his 95 Theses and nail them at the door of Wittenberg Cathedral on October 31st, 1517. Thesis 89 states, "Since the Pope seeks the salvation of souls rather than money by his indulgences, why does he suspend the indulgences and pardons previously granted when they have equal efficacy?" The 89th thesis clearly shows that Luther was concerned on losing income from the pilgrims who visited the relics stored at Wittenberg on All Saints' Day.
The 95 theses were written in Latin. A printer in Wittenberg translated them into German, and in 2 weeks they arrived at the hands of the German Empire, and 2 months later they reached all of Europe.
The conflict started and expanded rapidly in Germany and other European countries.
In Germany, the conflict reached a political and military dimension when the fear of Rome was lost. Martin Luther wrote that the emperor, rulers, and prince, with the help of arms, must secularize the Pope's states. They must attack the Roman Catholics and wash their hands in blood.
Zwingli was a radicalized pastor with military vocation who fought against Catholics and Anabaptists. He organized a radical group to join Anabaptists, submerging them tied to stones. Zwingli was killed in combat against Catholics in the Battle Chapel in Switzerland.
Michael Servetus, Spanish physician and theologian, whose unorthodox teachings led to his condemnation as heretic by both Protestants and Roman Catholics, and to his execution by Calvinists from Geneva. Servetus was found guilty of heresy, mainly on his views of the Trinity and baptism. He was burned alive at Champel on October 27th. Calvin played a prominent part in the trial and pressed for execution. His execution produced a Protestant controversy on imposing the death penalty for heresy. In Switzerland was the reformer John Calvin, who incited the consistory to apply the capital punishment to idolatrous, blasphemous, adulterers, warlocks, and heretics.
In just 4 years, 58 persons were executed, beheaded, burned, or hung in Geneva for religious crimes. Calvin stated, "Whoever pleads that it is unjust to kill heretics and blasphemous incurs in the same sin that is not imposed by human authority. It's God who speaks and prescribes a perpetual rule for his church." Calvinism expanded to France, Bohemia, Scotland, Germany, and England. In all those countries were conflicts and wars of different intensity.
In Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, Reformation was imposed using force, by means of persecution, killings, and exile.
On the other hand, Luther justified the actions of the princes against the peasants. Even when it involves acts of violence, he feels that they can be punished by the lords on the basis that they have become faithless, perjured, disobedient, rebellious, murderers, robbers, and blasphemers, who even a heathen ruler has the right and authority to punish. He even venerates those who fight against the peasants, stating that anyone who is killed fighting on the side of the rulers may be a true martyr in the eyes of God. The Scamaldic War refers to the period of violence from 1546 until 1547 between the armies of Charles V and the Scamaldic League within the realms of the Holy Roman Empire. The Scamaldic League was a defensive alliance of Lutheran princes with the Holy Roman Empire during the mid-16th century, starting for religious reasons at the Protestant Reformation. Its members eventually wanted to substitute the Holy Roman Empire as a political alliance. It was a militarily powerful alliance to confront Charles V and defend their political and religious interests.
The Battle of White Mountain was an important battle in the early stages of the 30 Years of War. It was fought on the 8th of November of 1620. An army of 15,000 Bohemians and mercenaries under Christian of Anhalt was defeated by 27,000 men of the combined armies of Ferdinand II and Holy Roman Emperor.
The Battle of White Mountain was more a skirmish than a full-fledged battle. The Bohemian army was no match for the Emperor Ferdinand's troops. The actual battle lasted only an hour and left the Bohemian army in tatters. Some 4,000 Protestants were killed or captured, while imperial losses amounted to only about 700. Before the war, about 151,000 farmsteads existed in the lands of the Bohemian crown, while by the year 1648, only about 50,000 remained. At the same time, the number of inhabitants decreased from 3 million to only 800,000. Christians killed each other at the rate of 25,000 per month over 30 years.
Europe's 30 Years of War went from 1618 to 1648. That was a conflict that had devastating consequences for Central Europe. With around 20% of the German population being killed, the war had religious roots as the Holy Roman Emperor tried to reassert Catholic hegemony over the Protestant areas of the empire.
Both inquisitions were equally odious. Fanaticism led leaders on both sides to commit unthinkable crimes. During the first 100 years of conflict, 5 million people were killed, and in the next 30 years, the figure reached 13 million deaths. In the 17th century, the exhausted powers eventually agreed not to try and impose their faith on other states.
There were several attempts to reach a compromise. There was even the possibility of avoiding conflict. Erasmus of Rotterdam hated conflict. He was a conciliator that belonged to the group of the intellectuals that at all times and place believed that the ideas are sufficient to change the world. His ideas were rejected by both groups in conflict.
Several treaties and councils were held, like the Peace of Westphalia, treaty that brought to an end of the 80 Years' War between Spain and the Dutch and the German phase of the 30 Years' War. And we can also mention the Council of Trent that was effective in Italy, but elsewhere it was an encouragement and stimulus to continue the conflict.
But at the end, it was for the insupportable calamity of the war, the repugnancy of the blood, and the depletion of the warriors that the conflict ended. In addition to its impoverishing effect, the famines and the epidemics contributed to diminish the fanaticism and radicalism, as well as to accept the beliefs of other people. The male population was halved. Thousands of villages and towns were destroyed. The cost was immense in all aspects, even for the church that split it in tens of thousands of sects.